and welcome back to Where There's a Will, There's a Burnden Way for episode 10. My name is Will Jones. I hope you've all had a good week. Happy Mother's Day too for any mums listening. It's obviously today at the time of recording. I hope it's been a good one for you. So it's been an eventful week in the world of Will and the Wanderers. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, kicking off with Monday, as ever, on a rather controversial note, actually, which saw the Maverick, Marcus Maddison, hit the headlines once again, as he was reported to have missed the home game against Barrow a couple of weeks ago, even back in February now, I think it was, due to sleeping in, supposedly. Rather unusual story to come out so late in the day, from absolutely nowhere, really, and based on, to be honest, absolutely nothing. Ian Evatt insisted he was ill and that was his reasoning for Maddison's absence that evening. It also seemed extremely unlikely given it was a home game and I believe Marcus is currently based at the hotel whilst on loan, so it seems almost impossible for him to have not been alerted at some stage to the fact there was a game on. Most bizarre. It was quickly debunked, however, though, by the gaffer as anticipated in his pre-Cambridge presser when he reiterated that Marcus was ill and there was no more to be said on the matter. As I said, very bizarre, somewhat of a non-story really, but a talking point from the week nonetheless. Monday was also former Wanderer Zach Clough's birthday, so a happy belated birthday to him too. Now, on to the main segment of this week's episode, something which will take up quite a large portion of the remainder of this episode, and it will be dedicated to and the victims of this event. It was the 75th anniversary of the Burnden disaster on Tuesday, something which is a significant moment in the club's history. It's a real tragedy, and it's something of utmost importance that we remember each year. Despite COVID-19 and the ability for fans to share this moment with the club, both the fans and the club were able to remember those 33 fans who went to the football match that day and never returned home, in a fitting tribute prior to the Cambridge match on Tuesday. In memory of this, I was joined by Bolton's club chaplain Phil Mason to talk about this awful event in further detail. Phil, thanks very much for joining me today. You're the perfect club representative to be able to chat on this topic. It's obviously so close to our hearts, and I'm so glad you can be here to, as is so important, remember those 33 supporters who lost their lives at a Bolton Wanderers football match 75 years ago this week, specifically the 9th of March at Burnden Park in a 6th round FA Cup tie with Stoke City.
Yeah, well, thank you, Will. It's good to be with you, especially in this very poignant week when we, as you rightly say, remember the 75th anniversary of that terrible disaster. And we recognise that as a club, we were the first club to have such a disaster. And of course, people were just recovering from the war. They had in their head that life was getting better. There was real positivity. And there was a real enthusiasm to get to that game that day because we were obviously doing well in the FA Cup. And with Stoke City playing, it was Stanley Matthews, who was one of the stars who was going to be playing that day.
Of course.
So everybody wanted to get to that game. And there was an expected crowd of around 55,000 people.
Wow.
That converted to around about, estimates are about 85,000 people, which is unbelievable, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And of course, what happened was that the crowd kind of swelled, and the turnstiles were closed at 2:40, but people came over from the embankment end over the railway embankment at some broken fences. They jumped over turnstiles to get in. But what's fascinating, Will, is that this week I've been reading again the account that comes direct from the enquiry. I've got the original copy of it for the 5-day inquiry following the disaster.
Yes.
And I've been rereading that, and there's an account by a little 11-year-old lad who was there. Just imagine he appeared in this inquiry on his own without any support. You wouldn't want that happen these days. And he gave this testimony of stood by a gate he was already in the ground by this time, but
Right.
for his life a bit, and
Yeah.
he was at the gate, and this bloke who he described wearing a black overcoat and a white scarf and a trilby with a band around it,
Mm.
smashed the padlock off the gate and opened this gate to let him out and to let himself out.
Oh gosh.
What followed was that the crowd who were trying to get in just piled in.
Yeah.
And he calls this little lad saying, I heard this man say, come on, Charlie, now's our chance. And they all ran in. So a lot of the crowd came in through that open gate, which of course is particularly poignant when you think about other disasters that followed ours.
Of course.
So that's where a lot of the crowd came from. The other problem on that day was that one of the stands was still being used by the Ministry of Supply, and that was following the war. And so they were storing stuff in the Ministry of Supply there, which meant that the stands were not at the capacity they should have been for the crowd, because they just couldn't get the people in because of the stuff that was in there.
Of course.
That's what happened, and then the kickoff took place at 3:00. The crowd surged forward, and the crush began. And people were being carried over the heads of others, just trying to get out the crush. So particularly children and women were being carried over the heads of people. And there's one iconic picture of a young girl then called Phyllis Robb, who was being carried over the heads of somebody.
Yes,
Phyllis,
of course, I remember that.
She died a couple of years ago now. She was 102 when she died. So imagine, she had such a full life. If it hadn't been for that. But people got crushed, and they all died tragically of asphyxiation as they fell to the ground, because they literally just couldn't breathe. This week, I was talking to the West Orton History Society on a Zoom call.
Mm-hmm.
And there were loads of people on this call listening to the story as I was telling it. And there was one bloke on there called Derek, and he was 90, and he was there as a 15-year-old lad, and he got in the crush, and he collapsed, and then came round surrounded by dead bodies. And he was literally given smelling salts and then told to get on his way, and he caught the bus back to West Orton. Can you imagine that? And he was traumatized by what he'd seen, what he'd witnessed, and the very fact that he nearly lost his life. He said he was close. He literally said could not breathe. He said he couldn't inhale or exhale because of the crush. But a little lad of 15 just being given smelling salts and saying, "Get on your way, get on the bus back to your house." Unbelievable.
Just shows how different things were those days.
It does, doesn't it? So obviously, there was 33 tragically lost their lives, and over 500 injured. Some with life-changing injuries because of the crush against the barriers and the twisted metal that gave them those injuries. And then, so at 12 minutes past 3, the game was stopped. At 20 past 3, it was decided to start the game again. And at 26 minutes past 3, once they had dragged the bodies up past the touchline and then put a new sawdust touchline in place, the game began again.
Wow.
Quite remarkable.
It is remarkable. It's unthinkable that something like that could just continue. And obviously, there was an element of not being aware of what had actually happened. I know that some people had thought that it had fainted and that it wasn't just as what we kind of know it is as now. But it's just unthinkable, isn't it? That restarted.
It was, and most people, as you say, thought that they knew that something had happened, but they didn't realise how serious it was. And of course, following the game, people who hadn't got a clue went off to the pub, went off to the cinema, and there was anxious families waiting at home, thinking, have they been caught up in this? Because they'd heard about it on the radio and they'd heard there'd been, casualties.
Yeah.
So there was loads and loads of anxious families that night, just waiting to see what on earth was going to happen next and whether their loved one was going to come home or not. And what's interesting is that Stanley Matthews, in an account some years later, said that as he was driving, because he didn't know very much during the game, But at the end, of course, they were told in the dressing room what had happened. And he said, as I was driving home, it hit me like a storm cloud what had happened. And I couldn't believe that we'd played a game whilst 33 lay dead at the side of the pit.
And I'm sure they wouldn't have, have continued had they known kind of the devastation that was going on around them. And I think it's just generally hard to put into words and picture the devastation of that day. It's simply unthinkable that, especially in today's surroundings, thankfully is a lot safer than it was back then. But for those who were subject to those conditions which caused them injury, I know a number which is believed to be in the hundreds. The vast majority thankfully survived and were able to return home to their loved ones. I'm sure it's something they vividly remember, though perhaps don't wish to talk about, which is upsetting enough as it is, and must be even more so for the families of those who were left anxiously waiting that evening, but obviously tragically never returned.
Yeah, terrible. I mean, this week, again, with it being such a poignant week, I was talking to a lady called Denise, and she was born a month after the disaster, and her father was killed in that disaster. So her mother, heavily pregnant, with only a few weeks to go before she was going to give birth to her daughter, had to go and identify her husband, and then, of course, bring Denise up as a parent. And then I was talking to another chap who his father and uncle were both killed in the disaster. And he was talking about how his mother, after the war, was really in quite a lot of poverty, and they didn't have enough money to put shoes on his feet because of losing the income from both uncle and from father. So the impact is not just the loss of life and the loss of a loved one, which is terrible enough in such circumstances. The consequences of that for the rest of their lives as well.
No, of course, yeah. I mean, it's almost a generation down now, as you say. The survivors mainly that we knew of have kind of either passed away now, or we don't really know of. So I suppose it's kind of to rely on the relatives of those who had to go through the experiences that day. Or although, like you said, you spoke to one of the original survivors the other day, which I'm sure must have been sort of heartwarming to know that they were still around and kind of, alive to tell the tale and what have you. And it must be traumatizing for them, and to hear it as a first account still must be rather raw for them. But yeah, I'm sure it's just something which is obviously still so important to us this day, and continues to and needs to be. Also, we can't forget the other team involved in that match that day, as you've mentioned, Stoke City and Stanley Matthews. I'm sure you'll agree with me in saying we must commend them, and similarly their remembrance, acknowledgements and services of the anniversary, and in general of the Burnden disaster. I'm sure that connection between the two clubs is a unique one, but one that you're extremely grateful for as a club and for their cooperation on as well as everybody else.
Yes, totally. I mean, they've been nothing but respectful every time we've had an anniversary, or every time we've had some event at the 70th anniversary, which of course was only 5 years ago. They had representatives come from the club, and they presented a scarf that we lay by the memorial book. So the memorial book in the main reception had a scarf of Bolton Wanderers and a scarf from Stoke City, and they also came to lay a wreath, which was a tremendous and poignant tribute. And I must say that this week, when we had the game on Tuesday night, which of course was the actual anniversary, it was very poignant to play a game that night. It was wonderful that Cambridge took part in the minute silence, wore black armbands, and also laid a wreath along with our captain, who laid a wreath too. So clubs paying their respects in that dignified way.
Absolutely, and as you mentioned earlier on, it was kind of the first disaster of its kind, and sadly, there's been quite a few since elsewhere. So there's several other clubs that are kind of familiar with the sort of tragedy that the club's gone through, and it's therefore natural, I suppose, for each club to be as respectful as each other. And I'm sure for us as well, it's a matter of pride and honour for the club that, whilst what happened that day was truly the darkest day in our history, the fact that the occasion is remembered nationwide and even beyond, sort of globally, it's so important that it's continued to be recognised in the best light that it possibly can, for generations to come, as it really is as an integral part of football history, as I'm sure you'll agree, Phil.
Absolutely is, and we pride ourselves within our club of being the first of many things. We were obviously one of the first of 12 clubs to form any league within the world. We were the first club to score the first goal in that league in the world. We scored the first goal at Wembley, in the original Wembley. We were the first to have a live televised game. We were the first to have substitutes when they were allowed. But tragically, within that history, as you say, the darkest day, we were the first to have this football disaster. And we do belong to a small family of clubs who sadly have had such disasters. And clearly, what is important is that those people who've lost their lives are remembered, but also that legislation is changed and put into place to ensure safety of people attending games. And the legislation did change forever that day, following our disaster. So turnstiles were changed in order to ensure that once they had let the number through they should let through, they clicked and stopped, and wouldn't let any more through. And then they put in a telephone system around the ground, emergency telephone system around the ground, so that you could get in contact with people from different parts of the ground. And that provision is still in legislation today as well. So it literally did change as a consequence and an impact of that disaster.
Absolutely. It's important to recognise that, there's still elements of that, of evidence of what caused that change, even in our ground today, like you say, with the turnstiles, and obviously access is much more limited than I'm sure it was back then. But even so, it's good to see that we still have evidence of that, of the changes that day caused, still within the nature of the football club. I'm sure it's of much importance and emphasis, that surrounds this awful event, that, though we rightfully, remember the occasion of the 33. And, I know we're a very family friendly club who, particularly yourself as club chaplain, would always kind of encourage supporters to acknowledge and recognise, the good work that the club staff do, to keep the supporters safe. And I'm sure that is well recognised, and I'm sure you've had, commendments from supporters, acknowledging, that in effect you're looking after their safety more than anything else.
Yeah, that's part and parcel of the experience of the game, of course, and it is important that we keep everybody safe, and we do that in a number of ways. Of course, there's the whole safety staff that are present. We do a lot around safeguarding to make sure children and young people are kept safe during a game and not getting themselves into difficulty. And of course, we encourage people to share with us any issues that there might be. If there's any, concerns over racism or sexism or whatever it might be, or bad language that is upsetting other people, then get it reported, and then we can make sure that as a family and a family club, we can all enjoy the game.
Of course, it's a general thing more than anything as well, isn't it? That I'm sure that you would encourage, even the relatives of the initial survivors, or the survivors themselves, if any are still alive, to come forward should they wish to open up about such a trauma in the family. I know sadly only a very few are still with us following the passing of like you say, Phyllis Robb a few years ago now. I'm sure you'd be the first to say it's something both yourself and the club as a whole are always open to talking about and listening to those experiences, not just to support that relative or that person, but also to educate other fellow fans on the subjects from personal accounts and experiences, even if they're secondhand.
Yes, that's right. And we, as you can see from this week, there's been a number of people been in touch, and I think that's wonderful that as a club, we have that sense of openness, and that's what it's about, being a family. You're absolutely spot on there, Will. and giving fans that opportunity to talk through whatever their issues are. And, you know, that's part and parcel of what the chaplaincy is there to do. And, you know, so many people do get in touch with the club over difficulties that they might have in their life, or challenges, or the loss of loved ones, and we, you know, try to support in any way that we can.
Absolutely. We obviously do a lot to commemorate the anniversary each year. Like you said, with the scarves and the book in the main reception, which I tend to walk past each game on my way in. So I do recognise that, and obviously the tributes which we tend to feature each year. Obviously a minute silence or applause, messages of goodwill, and just general recognition of those who were there that day. We also have references in the form of plaques around the ground, even at Sir Nat's statue. We've also worn commemorative kits made by current kit suppliers Macron, which was not only a lovely touch, but also a thing of beauty, I have to say. But you know, with supporters not around at the minute, Phil, I'm sure it's been a slightly different experience this year at that Cambridge game. Though no less supportive from a distance, following Tuesday's anniversary, and obviously that brief pre-match ceremony which took place with laying wreaths, and obviously observing a minute's silence as well, and even dedicating the win against Cambridge to those who lost their lives. Yeah, unfortunately, as I said, you know, we weren't able to do that with fans this year. How was that for you and the club generally this year in comparison to recent times and years gone by?
Well, it's been very strange without fans, you know, at the game. It really is a very odd experience, because the match build up for the day is exactly the same, and then you have the music of the, you know, the players coming out in the same way as we'd always do with fans there, and then it just goes silent, and it's really odd. And you know, we felt that we needed to commemorate, very importantly, this 75th anniversary, hence the reason for putting a little piece together on video that we put out on social media for retelling of the story of the Burnden Park disaster. And then, you know, the things as you described that we did at the game. But it was strange to have that minute silence and then for it to continue to be silent, because normally at the end of the end of the silence, you'd have everybody giving a huge round of applause
Yeah.
Of noise following that, which is there to support, you know, obviously the players, but also in memory of those that have lost their lives. So it was very odd, that experience. But I'm glad we were able to do what we could do under the circumstances. And I was particularly delighted by the match day programme and the special edition with the names of the 33 put on the front. And of course, people were able to look at that and view that digitally, but also to get a copy. And programmes haven't sold in the way that we would normally do this season, as you would imagine. But they went like hotcakes this week, and we got a reorder, and within an hour, they'd gone again. So I think it just shows how important this is to people of Bolton and Bolton fans even today.
It always will be. I'm sure. I actually purchased a copy of that program myself, and I think I've still got the one from the 70th anniversary even. You know, I think it's important that we have that in our history and it's passed down from generations. And you know, it's important that we keep it as a prominent subject, even though it is a particularly dark one. Though I'm so glad that we were able to kind of carry out the ceremony in as normal kind of a situation as possible. Although, like you said, you didn't have the supporters to then, you know, kind of acknowledge that. It must have even been kind of a, you know, something of a reassurance for you to ensure that the service had gone well. But I'm sure you were well aware that, you know, the thousands watching on iFollow and wherever else were obviously extremely, you know, appreciative of what you'd done. And I'm part of the supporters trust myself, and I know that a wreath was laid on behalf of those as well, and for the fans. So, you know, I'm glad that was there to be seen for all the fans during, you know, before and after the game as well. So yeah, I really appreciate what the club has done in that respect. Still, even this year, especially with it being such a big anniversary.
Yes, and just to let you know, Will, that those three wreaths that you there mentioned, including the one from the Supporters Trust, which is very important, after the game, we then took them from the pitch side and placed them at the Nat statue underneath the memorial plaque for the 33, where they'll stay for a couple of weeks.
That's brilliant to know. Thank you very much for that. I just on a last point as well, and I know kind of bringing it into the modern day, I know Ian Everett has been a massive advocate for remembering the Burnden disaster and ensuring that it is never forgotten. The victims are never forgotten, which is great to see. And I'm sure you'll stress too, Phil, that everyone associated with the club will do everything in our power to ensure that that continues to be the case and that we continue to remember the 33 for years to come.
Yes, there's no doubt about that. Ian very much engaged with the town, with the community. He believes that his players need to know the history of the club that they are working in and playing in. And he really, is enthusiastic about the players engaging with the community. And sadly, because of the current COVID conditions, we've not been able to do as much as we'd like to do. But I can assure you that there's a lot more to come under Ian and his team from that perspective. But I think you could see how important it was for him for us to remember the 33. He talked about them
Absolutely.
looking down from heaven and cheering us on the win. And the fact that he dedicated the win to the 33, I thought was particularly positive and poignant indeed.
Absolutely, it's great to see such a recognition, even from a playing perspective as well. The fact that Ian is so enthusiastic about that point, and I think it is important that the players are involved, and they're just as they recognise it just as much. And I know Anthony Sarcevic has made much of a point about that as well. Dedicating the win to them. So we're obviously extremely appreciative of that, and I think it's entirely the right thing to do. But yeah, thank you so much for your time today, Phil. It's been massively appreciated. Thank you for everything you do as a club chaplain generally, and to ensure that we continue to dedicate this time of year, every year, to those 33 victims of the Burnden disaster. Is there anything you'd like to say to any supporters listening, or even say a prayer, for example? Phil, the floor is yours as to how you'd like to close, however you feel most appropriate.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Will, for the opportunity to be with you today. And I just want to say thank you to all our supporters who, are sticking with us and being on this journey. I think it's a very exciting journey that we're on. And I want us all to stick together as a family. But as that family, when one member of our family hurts, we all hurt. And so at this time of year, particularly, remember those 33 who lost their lives, and those that were injured that day, and those relatives who had to live and continue to live without their loved ones around them. So I'll just conclude with a prayer for them. Lord, we thank you for the opportunity to remember all that happened on that day, and we particularly remember those who lost their loved ones. We ask that you will hold them in your love and in your care, and that you will continue to protect us and support us as we journey on from this day. Amen.
Phil, thank you. Thanks again to Phil for his time and for his words. Very much appreciated once again. We will always remember the 33. I would also encourage fans to purchase the Burnden Disaster Programme from the Cambridge game online from Ignition Sports Media for just £3. It's the normal match rate. It's certainly a collector's item and one that you can pass down through generations in years to come. On to the Cambridge match now, which followed the tributes. That turned out to be a very fitting and a largely comfortable 2-1 win over the league leaders at the time. Really showing how far we've come as a team since before Christmas. That very much put us on track for a playoff finish, at the very least, which was excellent. Goals from Owen Doyle once again, and from Anthony Sarcevic in that one. Great stuff from the boys, as always. That set us up nicely going into the weekend's game away at Port Vale. Wednesday was rather a quiet one, with little to report on the Wanderers front, and on a personal front for that matter, so we'll gloss straight over that one and go straight into Thursday, which, as is normally the case for an away game, it's the press conference for Saturday's game. Port Vale this time. An informative preview, as ever. No issues fitness-wise in the squad to report. I think Ian and his players were confident, as were the fans going into this one too. Friday saw Ian Evatt, as just mentioned, and Rico Santos awarded the actual cursed League 2 Manager and Player of the Month awards respectively, having been nominated last week. They are worthy winners, but it just meant everyone was a little bit more apprehensive about Saturday's game, being superstitious as we waited to see whether the curse would affect us. Saturday was then of course game day away at Port Vale. One change to the lineup from Tuesday as Marcus Maddison was absent, reasons for which remain unexplained at the time of recording. Let's hope he didn't sleep in. He was expected to play, though he hasn't been in the best form since joining Wanderers, which may be the explanation in itself. Though Evatt had mentioned this week that he thinks Madders will win us a game at some point, with him being such an impact player, so I'm not sure whether his exclusion from the team sheet was actually enforced or not, but it didn't matter as we still managed to nick a narrow 1-0 win thanks to a Gethin Jones strike in the second half. That broke the curse's back certainly, and although it wasn't the most straightforward of wins and it wasn't a poor surface, Port Vale didn't allow us to get into a rhythm whatsoever in the first half and weren't for rolling over. But we worked hard for the win and fortunately managed to come away with all 3 points. That saw us move up to 6th, joint 4th on all points, just 4 points off automatic promotion and 5 off the top. Very doable in my opinion. I'm sure we'll still be looking up there to see whether that is possible. No midweek game to come or therefore to preview this week. I think the Cambridge game was actually our last or second to last midweek game before the end of the season, so that gives the squad time to recover in between games, which helps at such a crucial stage of the season. A few teams above and below still have a game or two in hand on us, so that'll be interesting to see how the table pans out over the course of the next few weeks, and whether we can hold our nerve really, beat what's in front of us and concentrate on our own game rather than what's happening around us until it is absolutely necessary. I think that's my job for the time being rather than the players on the squad. Anyway, I think that's enough waffle from me for another week. So thank you very much for joining me on episode 10 of Where There's a Will, There's a Burnden Way. You can subscribe, like, comment, share, all that good stuff wherever you listen to me. And you can follow me on the socials at WTAWTABW and WIL1J on Twitter. And that's predominantly for content and guest suggestions. And you can always email me at WTAWTABW@gmail.com for all business inquiries. So thank you very much for tuning in to episode 10 of Where There's a Will, There's a Burnden Way, and to Phil Mason for his contributions too. And I shall catch you next week, Sunday the 21st of March, for episode 11. Bye now.